teach 'em.
Hello everybody, welcome back. It is a lovely, freezing cold, windy Saturday, but it's nice and cozy warm here in the shop. Going to ideally finish up this perch, get it all legged up, get everything glued, and I'll have a little bit of cleanup to do for finish, but the construction will be done. So looking forward to that. As always, I've got the chat room up on the other side of my screen. If anybody has questions, do me a favor, put those questions in all caps. I will not think you're shouting at me, but it's really the only way I can, separate the questions from just the chat stream. So I appreciate you helping me out there. First and foremost, I spent some time this week, and as always, as you guys know, there's been weird ghosts in machines lately with the audio. I should have the audio up pretty dang loud, so hopefully nobody has any issues. But just speak up, if you've got stuff like that, technical issues, again, put it in all caps and I'll be able to make a little bit more sense of it, which reminds me I should probably put the chat room there. Hey, Rob, how are you? All right. So since our last episode, I turned couple of stretchers. I quickly kind of breezed through that at the end of the last live session. So I did put out an actual recorded video, edited video of sizing those stretchers, turning the stretchers, and getting the tenons refined to 5/8 of an inch. Because I think I said 3/8 during the live session. It's typical when the camera goes live, my brain gets left somewhere else and I can't be held accountable for what I say. But so if you have questions at all about those stretchers, just keep in mind that video is now up on my channel. It will be included in the Perch playlist as well. Also, I just finished shaping the seat and refining things. I went around the underside with a spoke shave and really got a nice continuous facet all the way around, and I kind of rounded it out a little bit. I still have a faceted look on the underside, and I like that, frankly. There is a little bit more scraping that I want to do, but I did come in and deepen these spots right up front where the legs pass through, and I played around with the back of the bowl and trying to get a consistent flat on the top. Some of these perch stools I've seen don't have a flat. It just kind of comes to a very thin, kind of hard line, and then it curves down on the back. I did come back and put a chamfer on the top edge, just like we did on the bottom edge, just to kind of minimize that flat on the top. But what I'm left with is really probably 3/8 to a 1/2 inch flat at the back of the seat. And I really like that look. It gives me a very different reflection. It gives a definite back to the seat. A hard line would do that as well. A much thinner hard line would do that, but there's something about that flat that I really like there. And again, this is kind of the fun thing about this. You can make this stool very much your own and carve it and just play around with it. There are no rules to the carving. But when you get to this stage, you do want to have a seat that pretty much is just down to scraping. A gooseneck scraper. I said this on the Wood Talk recording yesterday, but this chair scraper by Bearcat by Brian Knoll is awesome. It's got just the right combination, weird curves and things to get into the inside of the seat. There's even an inside curve that you can come around and do some work here. I may want to do a little bit more scraping at the front, but I played around a lot with this hard line that happens right at the front here. I get this cool cymer curve that comes around and up and back down. And I spent a lot of time working on shaping down here and getting this hard line to match that one there. So you get this really cool look. Now, keep in mind, normally you're going to be looking down on the stool, so you're not going to really see a lot of these lines. But hey, it's fun, right? To play around with these and finesse those shapes. So what we're going to do for today is go ahead and really, we have to bore 4 holes, one in each leg and one in the cross stretcher. So, and there's a lot of kind of to do about how to bore these legs, how to get all these weird unknown compound angles right. And when you think about it, it's just 4 holes, but it's probably going to take me the better part of an hour to explain how do we go about boring 4 holes that are about 1 inch deep each. So first and foremost, I've still got my stretchers set up here with the little tag on the back, or what are we calling that? Not the tag. I kept calling this a Band-Aid in my recorded video earlier. The rubber band string back here. And I do want to keep this in place. In fact, I'm going to tighten it up a little bit with a slip knot. What I need to do is grab a pair of dividers and an awl, because I want to mark the locations of the mortises, where I'm actually going to have these mortises. And I'm going to have them intersect right at this first, sorry, wrong camera, at this first knuckle joint, this first bamboo joint, if you will. And while the chair is in this orientation, I can more easily cite which face is which. And with the string here, I actually, let me see if I can get this in a place that makes sense. Hey, I didn't even know you were here, Brian. Oh man, if I'd known. No, it's a great scraper. It really is. I don't know how you came up with the curves, probably just through your own chair sculpting, but it's just the perfect combination of curves. So I've got this string running back here. In fact, let me see if I can get even a little bit closer on this for you guys. And the string perfectly tells me where the stretcher is going to go. It's the shape of the stretcher. So I can actually eyeball in between the stretcher, or in between the string rather, and right in that little knuckle joint. And that will tell me where to put my mortise. Just going to use my birdcage awl to start a hole there. And this is just a smart thing to do now before you take it apart and you're trying to remember exactly what face is in, what orientation we're in, all this. Just do it while it's assembled and you'll avoid a lot of heartache. Now, while we're assembled, I want to go ahead and set a pair of dividers so that I'm using my bench top as my reference surface. I'll make sure I'm a bigger pair of dividers here. So since the bench top is the reference, I do need to make sure that everything is the same height. And these legs may need a little bit of tweaking. They may need some trimming. They're certainly going to need trimming because the angle is not flat. Right now it's sitting at a slight angle because obviously the bottom is square to the long axis. Well, now that it's skewed out and everything, it doesn't, that foot is going to have to be changed. But we'll get to that. That's like one of the last steps. So I'm going to set my dividers. There we go. We're the same on these legs. This front leg's probably going to be a little off. Actually, I'm going to go a little bit higher for the front leg. Set it from there and then double check again. So I'm just checking from where the leg meets the bench to that little mark I made with my birdcage awl. Good. So I'm a little bit low on the two back legs now. And just take a shim here. No, that's too thick. Okay, double checking again right at the front. I think we got it. Okay, so with the two little shims under the back legs here, the marks that I made with my birdcage awl are now all exactly at the same height in reference to the bench top. And I verify that by using these dividers. So as long as I keep these little shims in place, I'm good to go. That's important to recognize, because now what I need to do is bore the holes, and you could use a protractor, and you could set a protractor back down here and measure this angle, this intersection from the string in here, measure that angle, and it's going to be probably slightly different for every single leg. But rather than doing that, I'm going to create an arbitrary angle, and I'm going to lay out that angle on the legs itself. So to do that, I'm going to use a little bit of blue tape and just put that on the legs. So I've got a good marking surface, and that way these legs are finish ready. I don't want to have to remove any marks later. So I'm going to put first of all, I can move my string out of the way now. I'm going to put blue tape on the back side of the legs. So I'm putting it approximately 90 degrees away from the holes that I just marked. Then I'll put it on the side of the front leg. Again, about 90 degrees away from where the mark is. Now, grab my handy dandy chair making legging up tools. I have just about any jig or appliance that I use, I have end up strung up, and I just use a series of carabiners, kind of lump them all together. This actually hangs over in the corner of my shop. Those are my drilling guides, and here is my magical angle block. This angle, this board has an angle cut on it. I want to say it's probably 70-ish degrees. But what it is it's kind of an average angle of the splay of this stool, but really just about any Windsor. You're going to find that all Windsor style legs, and they kind of have a range in which they splay and they rake out. You go too far, like if you went all the way out to 60 degrees, you've got this triangle looking thing, and that, I don't know, that's going to put a lot of stress on the legs. You just don't see a really wide stance like that. They all tend to fall in that mid 70s to 80 degree range in reference from the floor, or in this case, the bench top. So what you need is a board with an angle on it that when I put it up to this leg, I can draw an angle on the board, on the leg, and it's gonna be on the leg. It's not gonna be dramatically, the leg's not gonna be dramatically at a different angle, because what I want is a longer line. And if the angle is dramatically different, then you're just going to get this little short line. So again, I'm overstating this, but I don't want to give anybody the impression that there's a whole lot of science to this angle board. I made this board when I took a class with Elia Bazzari. And the angle is, again, unknown. I suppose I could capture it and measure it, but I'm not gonna, because it doesn't really matter as long as it's kind of an average angle. So what you can do is you can grab your stool, you can set it up, and you can just kind of grab a bevel gauge and just kind of eyeball an angle. Come down here and go, yeah, that looks pretty close. What you're looking for is the blade of the square to intersect, be relatively close to the angle of the leg. That's relatively close. So I could lay this angle in on a board and cut that angle. I wonder if it matches. It doesn't match, but again, it's relatively close. So that's the magic angle board. And what this will allow us to do, and this is where things get a little bit weird, it's kind of like boring the seat holes. It's one of those things you kind of just have to do for it to make sense. I'm going to impose the angle that's on this board onto the blue tape. And because I've leveled this out and I've got all of my mortise lines at the same height in reference to the bench top, when I set this board on the bench top and I lay the line in there, I'm going to match that. I'm going to make sure that that line that I draw in there is consistent across the whole piece. I'm just going to do it. Stop talking about it and just do it. Shoot. This stool is a lot taller than any other Windsor I've ever built. So first issue is my board isn't really wide enough. So I'm going to raise this board up a little bit. Because with it just sitting on the bench, only about the top inch or so of this board is actually hitting the tape, and it's not actually hitting the level of my mortise. Now if I raise the whole thing up, I'm mo better. Let me do this side first. And I'm actually using one of these flat carpenter pencils because I can lay it flat on the board edge and pencil that line under the blue tape. And that's imposing this angle in the line on there. And as I look at the pencil line, I know you guys can't see this right now, but as I look at the pencil line, it's so obviously not in line with my legs. The angle's kind of running off this way, and my pencil line's kind of running up at a more vertical angle. Perfectly fine, but what we have is a consistent reference now. Now I'm going to set this up so that it's running straight back between the legs. So as I sight down here, I'm running right between the legs. Now I've laid out that leg. So the magic board can be set aside for a while. By the way, if you ever go to a lumber yard that like carries a lot of plywood, or even Home, well, I shouldn't say Home Depot because a lot of their plywood is Chinese, but if you ever run into a yard that carries domestic plywood, this is a bolster this is plywood that they ship a bunk of plywood in, they'll stack it up on these, and you can come in with a forklift and pick it up off of these. They also will tend to, what's the word I'm looking for? Package, reinforce plywood bunks with big hunks of plywood like this. These are just leftover pieces from the plywood factory. They get cut up into bolsters, and they are fantastic for like glue, like setting your glue projects up off of things, using as reference surfaces, because they tend to be really, really straight and flat, and they're super heavy. But you can find them from guys that carry a lot of plywood. They'll just have them kind of laying around, because when you unpack a bunk of plywood, they kind of get thrown to the side, and you know, the lumber yards will use them for all kinds of various things. But you can just say, look, do you have any of those plywood bolsters? And they'll probably give them to you, or if they charge you for them, a couple bucks. They're just really useful to have around the shop. So now, let's make sure I have not missed any questions. Oh, you guys are just chatting away in here. Okay, cool. So now I can take my whole thing apart. Set the seat aside. And I've got a couple of fun angle blocks here that I use specifically for drilling like this. Not a whole lot of excitement to them, just a V-notch cut into it, and I've got a little lip down here so that they'll rest just on my bench top. And that's important because this lip is the same height. It's at the same location. So when I set these on my bench like this, they're actually level to one another, which will be nice and important later. Let's lock those in place. What are we going to do here? First, I'm going to bore the holes in the back legs. So I'm going to place the little, again, this is why I use my birdcage awl. I place that hole up because I'm going to be drilling down from the top. Now I'm going to grab my angle board. First things first, this line that I drew on the block, let me get you closer here. Oops, wrong hotkey. There we go. Probably should have done that in Sharpie so that it stands out a little bit more. But this pencil line, I want to make it parallel to the bench top. Just grab a board here that is jointed on both sides. And I've loosened up the vise so that I can just lift up one of these blocks and set that in place. So now this pencil line is parallel to my bench top. What does that tell me? It tells me that I can now use my angle block, my angle board. I need to come up with a fancier name for that. Something foreign, something German with like 7 consonants in a row. Just to make it sound important. Instead of the magic angle block or the random angle block, it needs to be der Flügenhegenhofer. That sounded Swedish or something. Because then it would actually be much more important if it had that fancy name to it. So let's take a look at this. I have the angle. This is the angle that I imposed on the leg. The angle was sitting flat to the reference surface. So as we're seeing it here, now that I've got this line also flat to the reference surface, if I come in and I bore my hole to match this angle, see how I'm angling the drill bit here? Matching that angle, I have now captured the compound resultant angle of the splay and rake and all that fun stuff. So just by transferring it, lining it all up, using my bench top as a reference surface, I'm good to go. I'm going to use my birdcage awl to deepen this a little bit. I'm going to rock it around because I'm going to use a spoon bit to drill this out. And I want to give it a little bit of something to bite into at first. In fact, I think I may go ahead and start that hole with another bit. Because that 5/8 inch bit is kind of wide. I don't want it to rock around too much on me. So just to be safe, is everybody following what I'm doing here? You can't believe I opened the spring clamps with one hand? I'm not that strong, Bob. The Winkle block. Brian, you win. Der Eckmeister? See, what we need to do is get like 7 or 8 recommendations and then combine them all together. And actually, Rob, it should be D. Eckmeister. Well, I don't know. Meister means master, right? Can you D. Meister? It should be Der Meister, but I don't know. I prefer to have all my tools as women rather than I'm already hanging out with a bunch of guys as it is. Got to have some women in here. I'm just going to use a smaller spoon bit to get this started. Yeah, see? I will admit, this is the first time that I've used a spoon bit on this kind of bamboo profile. I'm not a fan right now. Because of the way this V-groove dives in so sharply, it wants to grab the lips of my spoon bit. I'm used to boring on a smooth surface here, where the point of the spoon bit can do its job, the rounded point. But even with a narrow spoon bit, it's wanting to grab this and kind of walk out of the way because the lips are in the way. So I'm actually going to have to use I have to do this twice. Where is my 5/8 inch auger? There it is. I want to use a spoon bit here because the long lead point of an auger bit, it's going to poke out the other side if I'm not careful. So that's bad. That should be enough to get that started. So now I can use the spoon bit and some magical blue tape as a depth stop. There we go. Make the hole 1 inch deep. The Winkle block. Yeah, Winklevoss, Winkle block, close enough. All right, so let's bore this hole. So the spoon bit has no lead point, so it will allow me to get pretty deep and maximize the length of my mortise without worrying about blowing out the back side. And see, as I bore, I'm just matching the angle on the Winkel Eckenmeister Alpenhundjäger Wassenspiegel Heim Stir. This is why spoon bits have been always the traditional chairmaker's bit, because they're really easy to steer, but they also don't have that lead point that can burst through a narrow leg, and there's no wedging action like we have with the lead screw of an auger. So you run a wedging action into a narrow leg like this, and there's every chance that you're going to end up splitting the leg. We done have a hole. Looky here, we gonna have a hole. And a hole that fits. Even better. All right. 1 hole down, 3 to go. Any questions? There's a lot of weird geometry going on right now. And the important thing, and I say this like if I'm sawing compound angles or something like that, I'll always talk about isolating the angles and moving the angle to, what's the word I'm looking for? If you've got to saw at 2 different angles, and if you just eliminate one of them and set one of the angles at 90 degrees, then it's a simple angle. So I'll angle my board so that my line, say I've got a compound angle drawn on my board, I'll angle the board in the vise so that that angle is now 90 degrees. I mean, it's still an angle, right? But it's a lot easier. We're used to sawing 90 degrees. So I could set that up, and now I just saw one angle because the board, I've angled the board in the vise. And that's the same thing we're doing here. We're imposing this angle, just that random line, and then orienting that line off of our bench, parallel to our bench, and then just boring at the same angle. So I'm not having to worry about necessarily the rake or the splay or what's what. It all comes down to just matching that angle in reference to my bench top. It's just a really, I don't know who exactly came up with this. I've seen Peter talk about it. I've seen Curtis Buchanan talk about it, Dave Sawyer, Elliot Bazarian, and they're all kind of, it's a small community. This is the technique that I used in the second and third Windsor chairs that I built. The very first one that I built, we did a lot of eyeballing, which worked. I mean, it was fine. It just, in hindsight, I look at that and go, how did we end up with a chair that actually went together? We bored it while the whole thing was assembled, and just kind of lined it up by eye, and it worked. But there was a lot more fiddling that went on at the final fitting stage. Here, especially on a chair like this that has kind of weird rake and splay, this is just a much more accurate way of doing this, and you never know what the angle is. You never have any idea what that angle is. So I need to now loosen this up and adjust that parallel. It's harder to do it this way when I'm looking over top like this. Apologize for blocking. I'm not blocking the camera. I'm on a different camera angle now. This has got to come up just a hair more. Okay. Now we're locked into place. I'm actually going to start this with a smaller auger bit. Because I'm going in with my auger bit kind of straight down, I'm unnecessarily widening the hole. I don't want to do that. I'm just talking to myself right now. Just ignore me. Now, I do want to make sure that I'm straight up and down this way. So if you have issues boring holes vertically, then it wouldn't hurt to kind of step off to the side every now and then and just make sure that you're hitting those angles. Just a tiny little bit to get started. It's too high. I'm going to run into it with my brace. You'll see Peter Galbert uses mirrors a lot. I've tried that. It works. One of these days I should get around to actually building a mirror, because then I could just look straight ahead and adjust my angle instead of stopping and checking it this way. But again, spoon bits are just so awesome for this. It's so easy to tweak your angle if you go off at all. But they also don't hold an angle real well, so you do have to keep checking, verifying that you're hitting all of your verticals and your angles and all that stuff, because of that rounded bit just, curves back and forth. Okay, 2 holes down, 2 to go. You can see I can just peel the tape off, and there's no more mark there that I have to worry about cleaning up later. So now we've got this leg. Okay, parallel, angle board. Brian's got a good point. When I do chairs with wildly curved legs, drilling in place is about the only option. And you're absolutely right. And what can be really useful there is these guys. Sorry, wrong camera. Bench are bit extensions. You can drop this in and put your bit on the end, and you get it like a dramatically longer drill bit. I mean, as it is, it's one of the reasons I like using brace and auger bits, because it's already a heck of a lot longer than your average cordless drill. But when you add this into the mix, you could actually stand back. Say I was boring from one leg to the other and I wanted to line up sight from one leg to the other. I could actually put the bit in the hole in my, my layout mark on the opposite leg, stand back in line with the second leg and actually bore it using a bit extender. These are fantastic. I mean, you can also buy like super long auger bits made for like boring, electricians use them and things like that. You can get these in a variety of sizes. This is just one of two that I have. The other thing, if you're boring, like say you've got a sack back Windsor and you need to bore from the bow through the arm into the seat, you can actually use an extension bit. And you could bore the hole in the top just by kind of sighting down and just trying to hit your mark at the bottom. You bore that hole and then you can actually thread the extender through the hole and actually keep, all you have to do is focus on keeping your bit centered in the hole in the bow that you already drilled, and the whole thing lines up really nicely. There's something to be said about that. But this way works really well too. And actually, when you've got just a whole bunch of different parts that need to sync up, I don't think there's any way to possibly manage all of those angles, and it just makes so much more sense to just bore in place. Brian, you've built more chairs than I have, I'm sure. So I think that, and you've done a lot of sculpted kind of Maloof-esque work. So there's nothing, there's no references whatsoever there, especially the whole thing is canted at different angles. And yeah, just sometimes you just got to assemble the thing and just kind of eyeball it in place. If you want to think about it a different way, the way this leg is oriented now, when we marked it, we used this angle block to mark this pencil line, and we referenced the bench top. Well, now that we've set this pencil line parallel to the bench top, think of the pencil line as the bench top. And now we're just matching the angle that we put into it. And it's just kind of genius how this thing works out. I love spoon bits. They're just such cool little tools. 3 holes down, 1 to go. And guess what? The last one, it's a 90-degree hole. Piece of cake. So now I have to drill through my stretcher. You know what I didn't do? I didn't mark my stretcher, but this is just 90 degrees. So I'm going to let's pick a face. This one's the ugliest face, so I'm just going to bore into that. So I need to put, again, my bored hole up. And now, this is why I liked having these, the notches on these leg blocks at the same height. Because if I just reference them down on the bench top now, this leg is now parallel to my bench top. That is important because This hole just needs to be bored square. You knew that was going to happen, didn't you? You were watching going, he's going to hit that square. Lord. There are some people who will make this a through hole too and actually wedge this. I've seen that show up on a couple of chairs. I don't think we're going to go that far today. Okay, 4 holes. Let's hope we got it all right. Hope and pray. I've gone ahead and I just put little chamfers on the ends of all of my tenons here, just so that they fit into my holes nicely. You know, they don't catch an edge or something like that. Today's live broadcast is brought to you by the letter T. So my front leg goes like that. Back leg goes like that. My other back leg goes like that. Ta-da! We have one legged up. I don't want to hammer these all the way in place just yet because they are meant to be tight. But yeah, that works out nicely. So guess what? It's time to glue it up. So I can move all of my magic Wingelmeister hopping tool out of the way with the Jurgen twin boring blocks. Just hang this out of the way. Isn't that the wrong way? Splay going down. Splay going down. Did I miss something? No? It's played like that. The top is the top. How's my glue? Hide glue's ready to go. Rob asks, isn't it stronger when it's wedged? Sure. But you have to recognize, for most of the Windsor construction, we're using that combination of green and dried wood. So when you've got the leg, if you've taken your tenon and you've kind of hyper dried it, you've stuck it in a kiln and you've shrunk it down, it's going to, you've, what's the word I'm looking for? You've super dried it. So it's going to absorb moisture when you pull it out of a kiln. A lot of people will have a light bulb in a box with a series of holes, and you'll just drop the tenon through the holes, and that light bulb will actually suck all the moisture, get it down to 0% and shrink up that tenon. When you pull it out of that box, the tenon starts to swell. It starts to pick up moisture. Heat's been on the last couple of days here, so my ambient moisture, equilibrium moisture in the shop is about 9% now, but it's still going to soak that up. We've bored the hole. At the same time, when we bored the hole, we've exposed ingrain. So the hole is now dumping moisture. The hole is starting to shrink. The tenon is picking up moisture and starting to swell. So when you drive them together, they're going to shrink and swell and lock together. And really, the wedge is almost unnecessary at that point. We add a little glue in there just for fun to make us feel good about ourselves. But once you hammer that thing together and let it come into equilibrium, it's interlocked itself together. But we do wedge the legs into the seat because that's where you're constantly picking the seat up by its seat, so that we want that little bit of mechanical joint. You could certainly wedge all of your joints. I just don't want the look of the through leg, the through tenon coming out the other side and having a wedge there. Where I've seen it is on this joint, and I think it might look okay in that instance because it's like pointing to the back or whatever. With this particular pattern, imagine trying to put a wedge on the back side here. I think it would detract from what we've already created in our little bamboo look here. With a typical smooth leg that maybe just has a slight cove to it, that can look kind of cool. I don't think we need that extra detail here. Okay. Move everything out of the way that I don't need so that I don't end up gluing something where it's not supposed to be glued or something silly like that. I've got my bolsters for the glue up. Now, I need to create kerfs in the top of these legs for wedges. So I'm going to assemble. I should have marked these while it was already assembled, but I didn't. Okay, let me just make sure these are seated. Now what I want to do with the grain of my seat running front to back, I want the wedges to run across the width of the seat so that they're wedging the leg along the end grain. I'm going to flip this over and I'm just going to mark the kerfs on the legs. And actually, you know what I need to do? I need to saw these a little bit shorter right now. Look, everybody, Shannon's using a Japanese saw. It's rotating in the... There we go. What the heck? You're bugging me. You're bugging me. This is just not efficient right now. Jeez. So much drama just to saw these relatively close. I've still got like the narrow part here, and I've got my lathe marks on top, and it's just a little hard to mark it exactly as I want it. So I certainly didn't need to use this flush trim saw for all of that, but it is what it is. Philip wants to know, Peter Curtiselia, they put their mortises on the bench, but why not match them up exactly in situ? I was just talking about that, Peter, and using the extension bit. Either way is going to work. I think what you find is that by boring them this way, you eliminate a lot of the guesswork because you are actually laying in layout lines and working towards those layout lines. Whereas, well, just as you saw, as I was trying to saw it while it was assembled, and that back leg wanted to rotate on me, and it was slipping and sliding around, which could be kind of a problem if you're trying to bore that hole exactly and the legs are shifting on you. That's not good. So it adds a little bit of order into what could be a very chaotic setup. But like I said, the very first Windsor I ever built, we just assembled and bored everything by eye using those extension bits. Now, all that just to mark out my wedges. But again, if I get my wedges, my saw kerfs put in incorrectly, I'll split my seat as I try to wedge it, and that would make me cry. Make me very, very sad. So how big of a wedge kerf do I need? Not very big. about the length of a dovetail saw. Whatever the distance under the back is of that dovetail saw, that's how deep I'm cutting that kerf. Okay, those are ready. Now to create some wedges, and I have a whole like toolbox filled with random bits and bobs over here. Just tenon cheeks and stuff. Tenon cheeks make great wedge stock. But what I want is a wedge that is ever so slightly wider than my holes are. Because as I drive this in, I actually do want the wedge to kind of bite into the seat just a little bit and kind of give it a tooth. So not only does it wedge it apart, but it also can prevent the leg from rotating in the seat. Because there's all kinds of racking forces that happen on a seat when you sit on it. What I'm going to do is, I have a piece of cherry here that works kind of perfectly for this. Just saw out like 1 inch long blanks here. And I just need to taper that wedge. And it's going to be a double tapered wedge so that ideally as it drives in, it's spreading the leg apart evenly both directions. I could leave one leg flat and wedge it, and physics tells me that one side of the wedge will have uneven pressure on it. I don't know how true that is on this type of application where we're talking really a very small amount of wedging action here. Helps to wedge it in the side that has a kerf already. All right. Okay. Everybody having fun yet? Philip says you could also fox wedge. Certainly you could, but you know, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about the fox wedge tenon. It's kind of like the blind, well, you know what? Even the blind miter dovetail serves more purpose than the fox wedge tenon. I mean, I suppose certainly a wedge tenon is stronger, but no one is ever going to see that. And I just question how necessary it is in this particular situation. You're adding undue complexity to the system here that could possibly give you problems later on. So I just don't know that I would really need to add additional complexity by saying, okay, now I'm going to create a wedge that's going to perfectly seat up as I'm hammering it in place. There's also not that much room to play with here. I mean, we're talking about an inch deep mortise. And you know, how much is it going to wedge apart? Is it going to prevent the leg from seating up properly because the wedge didn't seat all the way? There's just all kinds of stuff. There's all kinds of complexity that you're adding into the mix by saying, I'm going to use a Fox wedge tenon. And it just doesn't seem necessary, frankly. You drill precise mortises that line up perfectly, and you don't really need a lot of that excess stuff. But hey, to each his own, man. Fox wedge tenons are cool. I just don't know how really practical they are. Look at it this way. I have sat in many Windsor chairs that are older than the United States of America and will be here long after I'm gone. So the construction methods using the green wood contraction and such, you really can't beat that. This bit is actually, I think this is a little too thick, this wedge stock. Obviously that board was a little, I'll deal with it. I'll deal with it. Just have to taper it more. It was Philip who was saying that? Philip, have you used Fox wedge tenons before with success? You know what? Brian, you're a smart guy. The purpose of these stretchers actually is, as the name denotes, stretching. It's stretching those legs apart a little bit, adding stability. And really what's happening is you're putting that joint under compression. Because as you sit on it, the legs want to kind of squeeze together. Stretcher keeps them from moving around and racking around, but it's driving them apart and putting the pressure so the legs are driven apart and they're pushing, they want to spring back and they're pushing in, putting the entire joint in tension, which is really the best, maybe the only way to fight racking forces. You know, when you look at Japanese temples, you know, Japan sits on the ring of fire, so it gets earthquakes and all kinds of fun stuff. So you need to build joinery for your buildings to withstand the shaking of earthquakes. And in order to do that, you put all your joints in compression. Dog is going bonkers about something right now. A leaf must have blown by the front of the house. How dare a leaf blow into his yard? Okay, so I'm going to leave those wedges a little bit wider than the hole itself, and I'll do a last minute trim right before I hammer them in place. But right now, we're ready to glue up. So first rule of glue up is get everything out of the way. I don't need any of this excess stuff. Clean up my workspace a little bit, because it's just going to cause me problems. So I'm tripping over things and reaching for glue and all that fun stuff. Oh, hey, it's a good point, Philip. Wedges are great when a tenon doesn't fit exactly. I contend that that's the whole reason the drawbore came into being, is somebody was like, whoops, I got to fix this. Let's peg it and put it under tension. And then, the drawbore was born as an accepted construction technique because somebody, found an ingenious way to fix it. In a perfect world, all of our joints would fit perfectly and we don't have to worry about any of this stuff. But I caution people, if you're building chairs, chairs just have so many more forces on them than, your typical piece of case furniture. And if you don't have that precision in your joinery, they're going to work apart over time. They're going to fall apart over time. The racking forces alone that occur on the legs of a chair are just immense. And you got to build smartly in order to prevent your chair from coming apart. But let's be real. Most of the stuff we're going to build is going to outlast us. So I suppose if it falls apart, 200 years from now, of course, let's be real. The way we're going right now with our furniture, no one expects furniture to last more than like a year. So just about anything we build is going to far exceed the societal expectation. Not that that's an excuse to build poor furniture, but You guys may think I'm being a little anal retentive, but trust me, get stuff out of the way. I get into so much trouble in glue-ups by just having random stuff kind of in the way that doesn't need to be there. You're in the heat of the moment and suddenly, you put something in backwards. You've now legged up a chair and all the legs are going the wrong direction. It's just not fun, not a good idea. So I am going to assemble the T-stretcher first. Then I'm going to assemble the stretchers into the legs, and I'll have to kind of slightly spread the legs to get them to slip into the holes, because obviously it's going to angle everything in. So you have to do a little bit of spreading there, but that's all right. The last step being the wedges themselves. So I'll pull these wedges out, set them aside. Everything will end up in Goodwill with lots of paint on it. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for that. Thank you for making all the fine work we do here come into perspective. We all feel much better about ourselves. Okay. Glue, glue, glue. Oh, I know what I was reaching for. It's right here. I'm just using liquid hide glue here because I didn't take the time to mix up any, quote, real hide glue, but this stuff works just fine. Put it in the mortise. There's the other thing is when you put glue in the mortise and you put glue on the tenons, you're injecting moisture. So now things are starting to expand on you. Oh, gotta love the squeaky sound of a well-fit joint. Lovely. All right, let's do the front leg. twist that. There we go. Before I hammer that in, I need to make sure that we're in line here. There we go. Can also twist that ever so slightly. Now comes the fun part. Got to work relatively quickly now because I want to get these tenons into the back legs, and it's a little hard to figure out exactly the way you want the orientation. I mean, technically, if the hole fits well, you shouldn't have any problems here, but you're liable to have a little bit of wiggle room on these legs, and they'll change their angle on you if you're not careful. So I've got my legs marked. If you remember, I went little hash marks, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I'm flipping this seat over to figure out, okay, here's 1, 2 needs to go over here. So I'm just gonna slot that in the leg for now. Stick that in place. Slot that in the leg. Stick that in place. Whoops, I knew that was going to happen. I'm going to have to go ahead and put these into the legs now. Okay. Mortises. Let's go ahead and paint the tenons first. Probably not necessary, but I'm going to go ahead and paint the mortises, again, just to inject that little bit of moisture. Start the hole closing up on me. This thing looks so weird when the seat is set flat because everything is at that weird angle. Now, wedges, wedges, wedges. I'm not sure if I can get the best camera angle on this. Let's see. What I want to do, I'm going to have to put this down on the floor, in which case I need a better camera angle. So I'm just going to come up here to the seat and essentially pair these wedges to shape. But they taper. Actually, I'm going to use a hammer and knock one of my clamps over. That's the sound of a seated wedge. But see, by tapering them ever so slightly, just so that they get into the wedge, and then as it gets wider, as the wedge comes up, it actually starts to bite in to the sides of the seat and gives us that fun little tooth there. Somehow I've managed to get glue everywhere. Oh, dang it. I'm going to get glue on my chisel now. Lee Nielsen, gods forgive me. I suppose I could do this work beforehand. It doesn't have to be done right now. I just feel like I'm better off sizing it right there. Yeah, I'm thinking about this, and I'm actually going to email one of the modern chair masters on this. Because the more I think about... Again, was it Phil who asked this question? Why go to that trouble? Why not just leg them up in situ? Because, like I said, that was the method that I used before. And I'm trying to figure out, there is a certain amount of precision that I brought to bear by using that method. But at the same time, you saw as I was kind of muscling that last leg in place, that, there's a little bit of flex in the system. It's just the way it works, and you've got to have that flex because of the complex geometry. If I was off, if I had botched one of the holes and it was off a couple degrees, I could still kind of bend it in place, and due to the wedging action of everything, it would come up tight. So I'm starting to question, what is it that drove guys like Peter, who teaches this a lot. What is it that drove him to say, you know what, I need a better way to do this. I need a more accurate way to do this. Because, I've got a sack back Windsor chair and a balloon back Windsor chair that was done just eyeballing stuff. And they look great. The sack back is 10 years old, I think, at this point, which is nothing in terms of, Windsor chair lifespans, but it's as sturdy as the day it was built. And it was all done by eye. And I'm starting to question why. Why was it so important that I do that particular method? It's cool. There's no doubt. It's a cool method of doing it. But I do know that the by eye thing kind of freaks a lot of people out. A lot of people just don't trust their own ability to eyeball stuff. I've been doing it enough now that it's actually my preferred method of working, but I don't know. I'm going to have to get back to you on that because the more I think about it, the more I think I don't really have a good answer for that. But hey, by the way, we just built a perch stool and look how nice and firm that is. So yay, looks awesome. From here, I've got to flush trim this down. I'll come in with that flush trim saw, and certainly once it's glued up and it's nice and firm, it's a lot easier to go ahead and flush trim these things. So I'm not going to actually flush trim it, I'm just going to close trim it. And I want to show you as well kind of how that what's the word I'm looking for? Wedge has bit into the seat. See, it's a lot harder to flush trim back here because the way the bowl of the seat works. But I just want to get it close, and then I'll come in with a chisel and actually work my way down with the chisel. I want to take longer strokes here, but I don't want to gouge up my seat. And we get cool wedged offcuts. So let's take a look here. This one in particular, if you look there, you can see how the wedge is actually bit into the seat a little bit. So that wedge is wider, and it's given it that tooth, that fun mechanical tooth that will prevent the seat from ever rotating. Moment of truth here. Oh, heck yeah. Oh my God, so comfortable. The forward tilt just perfectly aligns your spine. The sculpted part perfectly cradles my posterior. Oh, it's the ultimate shop stool. Loving it. So again, from here, I'm gonna, let things let things cure a little bit, just so I'm not gumming up my chisels by carving that flush. But if you do kind of a bevel down approach, you can lever out a lot of that, and what you do is you're carving kind of a peak in the middle, and then it's really easy to come back, bevel up, and flush it down. In these inset areas, you just want to get it close, and if necessary, you can use the travasher again to flatten them out, or you can just use a card scraper to flatten it out. As far as leveling the legs, now what I have to do is I will grab, and I've got you can just use a divider again, but there's this great scribing tool that you can get at Veritas. Actually, it's a fast cap tool. I bought it at Veritas, but it's got a little compass, and it rides flat on the bench top. So what you can do is, again, referencing off your bench top, I can mark around these legs, and what I'm doing is creating that flat on the bottom that is relative to the rake and splayed angle. And I'll saw that in, and then it's a three-legged stool, right? So it will sit level, I should say, on any surface. But if you wanted to kind of level it, I'd put a level across the back here and level it out. What I will do is find kind of the high side, and then you can shim it up using a series of shims in order to get it perfectly level, and then just use this scribe to mark the lines here. Saw them in. You can plane them flat. And again, I'll put just a little chamfer on the underside of the legs just to prevent any splintering. So now, if you look at this leg, you can see that line, how it's all crazy. Well, that's the angle. That's the flat of my bench top. I just need to saw that away and it will sit with the legs flat on the surface. So handy little thing. Again, a divider will work. This is just like super slick on the bottom and it's just really easy to use. So that's it. I mean, this is the last part I'm going to show. I will certainly come back and revisit this when, you know, it's finished. As far as finish goes, you know, the traditional finish for a Windsor chair is milk paints and such. Actually leave that out. Because I built this out of walnut and teak, I am not going to milk paint this thing. I'm just going to clear coat it. I've still got some of a gallon of Endurovar left, so I'm just going to use Endurovar. There's no secret to the clear coat finish on this. Just wipe on, you know, apply another coat as necessary. Someday maybe I'll do another milk painted furniture piece, but there's no way I would ever want to cover up the grain on this. This looks awesome.